The orbital station that floated above the silver-blue planet of Varus was the pride of the Galactic Academy. It was here that hundreds of alien species sent their brightest students to learn science, engineering, and technology that could shape the future of the galaxy. The Academy's lecture halls were filled with voices of many languages, the clatter of tools, the hum of reactors, and the endless curiosity of minds from across the stars. Yet even in this place that claimed to value knowledge above all else, there were shadows of old prejudice. Lysera knew this well. She sat near the back of Lecture Hall 6, her thin hands folded neatly on her desk, her eyes scanning the glowing diagrams projected above the stage. Her people, the Kalorians, were tall and slender, with faintly glowing patterns running across their skin like living constellations. To many, the patterns were beautiful. To most, however, they were reminders of fear. Long ago, Kalorians had built weapons of devastating energy. Whole fleets had fallen to their ancestors' creations. Even though centuries had passed since that war, suspicion clung to her species like an unshakable shadow. So while other students clustered in groups buzzing with chatter, exchanging notes or laughing at private jokes, Lysera's seat was always empty on both sides. No one ever sat beside her. She told herself she didn't mind. She told herself she preferred the silence, that it gave her more time to think, to focus. But deep down, every empty chair felt like a silent judgment. Today was no different. The lecture hall was crowded. Students of all shapes and sizes filled the rows. Insectoid xerics clicking their mandibles in rhythm, scaled Vorthin whispering in deep voices, and feathered Arxians preening while they spoke. But beside Lysera, as always, the seats remained untouched. The professor, an aging Serath with 4 eyes and a deep, calm voice, began to explain the principles of energy core stabilization. Equations scrolled across the air, bright symbols weaving into complex structures. Lysera's mind absorbed them quickly. She loved the logic of engineering. Machines did not judge. Numbers did not care about history. Circuits and alloys only asked for precision and patience. Her stylus moved swiftly across her slate, recording notes in elegant script. She was so focused that she barely noticed the door sliding open at the back. A human entered. Lysera had seen humans before, of course. They were a young species by galactic standards, but one that had risen quickly, earning respect through both ingenuity and stubborn courage. They were known to adapt, to improvise, to find solutions others overlooked. Humans were also unpredictable, sometimes friendly, sometimes reckless, but rarely quiet. This one seemed in a rush. He was broad-shouldered, with dark hair tied loosely back, and a simple engineer's toolkit slung over one arm. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, as though he had been working until the last possible moment before running to class. Students watched as he scanned the room for an empty seat. Every row was crowded. Every seat was filled, except of course the one beside Lysera. She froze. Her heart began to beat faster. Surely he would do as the others did. Surely he would glance at her, hesitate, and then squeeze into another row. She waited for the familiar sting of rejection. But he didn't. The human walked down the aisle, barely pausing. Without a word, he set his toolkit down, pulled the chair beside her, and sat. Just like that. Lysera's breath caught in her throat. Around them, whispers stirred. A few students craned their necks, staring with open disbelief. But the human didn't seem to notice. He was already digging through his toolkit, pulling out a worn data pad and an old-fashioned stylus that looked half-broken. He muttered something under his breath about always running late, and began copying the professor's equations. Lysera's glowing patterns dimmed slightly, a Kalorian reflex when she felt unsettled. She glanced sideways at him, half expecting him to realize where he had sat, half expecting him to shift uncomfortably and move away. But he didn't, he just kept writing. The lecture continued. Lysera tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting back to the human. Why had he sat there? Why hadn't he cared about the stares of others? Was it ignorance? Or was it something else? When the professor projected a new formula, Lysera noticed the human's datapad flicker with static. His stylus scratched uselessly. She hesitated, then, with quiet courage, leaned slightly toward him. "Your screen," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but edged with nerves. "It's not calibrating." The human looked up, surprised. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. For a moment, Lysera braced herself for suspicion. Instead, he grinned faintly, almost sheepishly. "Yeah," he whispered back. "This thing's half broken. Been meaning to fix it." Before she could stop herself, Lysira extended her hand. May I? He blinked, then handed it over without hesitation. No suspicion. No hesitation. Her slender fingers danced across the screen, adjusting settings, realigning the frequency. In less than a minute, the datapad hummed back to life, stable and bright. She handed it back, her glowing patterns flickering faintly in pride. The human raised his brows. Impressive. Lysira lowered her gaze quickly, hiding her small smile. It was simple. Simple for you, maybe, he muttered, scratching at the back of his head. I've been fighting with that thing for weeks. The professor's voice cut across the hall again, assigning lab partners for the upcoming project. The screen displayed names in pairs. Lysira's eyes widened when she saw hers. Lysira Kaylor, Marcus Hale. So that was his name. Marcus. She stiffened. The thought of working closely with anyone was daunting enough. To work with a human, one who had already broken the invisible rule of sitting beside her, seemed even stranger. What if he regretted it? What if he demanded a different partner like so many others had in the past? But when Marcus saw the list, he only nodded, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Looks like we're stuck together, he said quietly, almost with humor. Guess we'll have to make it work. Lysira's patterns glowed faintly brighter, betraying her surprise. She quickly dimmed them again. Yes, we will. The lecture ended soon after. Students rose, gathering in clusters, their voices buzzing like static. Many glanced at Lysira and Marcus, some whispering, others outright sneering. Marcus seemed not to notice, or perhaps he didn't care. He simply picked up his toolkit and looked at Lysira. Workshop later? He asked, as if speaking to a long-time colleague rather than someone the whole academy avoided. Lysira hesitated, unused to the directness. Then she nodded. Yes, the workshop is open after 7th cycle. Good, I'll see you then. He slung his bag over his shoulder and walked out, not once looking back at the others. Lysira remained seated for a long moment after the hall emptied. Her heart was still beating faster than usual. She pressed a hand lightly against her chest, staring at the now empty seat beside her. No one had ever sat there before. No one had ever stayed, and yet the human engineer had, without a word. For the first time in many cycles, the empty silence around her felt different. Not as heavy. Not as cold. Something had shifted, and though she didn't yet understand what it meant, Lysira could not stop the thought from echoing in her mind. Perhaps not all seats will remain empty forever. The Galactic Academy's workshop was a vast chamber filled with the sounds of invention. Sparks hissed from welding torches, plasma cutters hummed, and the low thrum of fusion drills echoed against the reinforced walls. Students worked at their stations in pairs or small groups, each project competing to catch the eye of the professors who wandered the rows with sharp gazes. In one corner, a space had been assigned to Lysira and Marcus Hale. Lysira arrived first. She carried her slate tucked close to her chest, her glowing skin patterns dimmed in their usual attempt to be less noticeable. Her eyes scanned the tools neatly arranged on the workbench: hydrospanners, fusion clamps, graviton stabilizers. She touched each one carefully, as though assuring herself that the workshop was real and not another dream where she was forced to stand alone. When Marcus walked in, he carried himself with the same quiet confidence she had noticed in the lecture hall. His toolkit swung at his side, battered and scratched from years of use. Unlike the gleaming brand-new tools of many alien students, his looked worn but also cared for, each piece clearly important to him. Hey, he greeted simply, sliding onto the bench beside her. No hesitation, no side glance at her glowing skin. Just a plain human hey. Lysira nodded, unsure how to respond. Hello. He unpacked his tools in practiced motions, then looked at her with a grin. So, partners, guess we should figure out what we're building before everyone else beats us to the good ideas. Lysira tilted her head slightly. The professor said an energy-efficient engine core. Most students will attempt a modified fusion reactor. Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. Which means if we want to stand out, we shouldn't do what everyone else is doing. Lysira blinked. She had expected him to follow the standard model, to play it safe. That was what most students did. What do you suggest? He tapped a finger on the bench, thinking. Humans have a saying, if you want new answers, ask different questions. What if instead of improving fusion, we look at something else entirely? Something hybrid? Lysira's patterns flickered faintly, betraying interest. Hybrid? Yeah, combine two systems. Fusion for base output and gravitic compression for bursts of power. Stable efficiency most of the time, but when you need extra thrust, you channel the compressed field. Lysra stared at him. No one had suggested such a design before. Fusion and gravitic compression together were considered unstable, nearly impossible to synchronize. Yet, in her mind, equations already began to form. Lines of logic connecting like sparks. That could work, she admitted softly. Marcus grinned wider. Knew it, I can see it in your eyes. You've already solved half of it, haven't you? She lowered her gaze quickly, embarrassed. Not solved. Only imagined. Well, Marcus said, leaning closer, lowering his voice. Imagining is how solving begins. For the first time in cycles, Lysra allowed herself a small smile. They began working. Marcus was quick with his hands, adjusting clamps and wiring with an ease that came from years of tinkering. He sometimes muttered to himself, calling tools by strange human nicknames. Old Reliable and Sparky and Clampy. Lysra found it strange, even childish, but also oddly comforting. Lysra, in contrast, moved with precision. Every calculation was exact. Every component measured twice before she touched it. She wrote lines of code into the diagnostic pad, her symbols flowing smoothly. Marcus would sometimes glance over and whistle. You code faster than I can think. You improvise faster than I can calculate, she replied once, surprising herself with the honesty. He chuckled. Guess we make a good team then. Hours passed. Around them other students whispered. Some sneered, some laughed. Lysra caught fragments. Why is he sitting with her? Doesn't he know what she is? Humans really are reckless. Each word felt like a needle, but Marcus didn't react. Whether he didn't hear or simply didn't care, she couldn't tell. He just kept working, passing her tools, asking her thoughts, adjusting parts when she asked. At one point, Lysra paused, staring at a tangled cluster of wires. She had calculated everything, yet the design still refused to stabilize. Her chest tightened with frustration. Old doubts returned. Of course it doesn't work. Of course they'll say it failed because of you, Marcus noticed. He leaned on the bench, watching her carefully. What's wrong? She hesitated. The compression field resists synchronization. I cannot force it to align. Marcus tilted his head, then reached for the wires. Maybe don't force it, she blinked. What? Think about it, he explained, adjusting the connections. You're trying to make the system obey perfect logic. But sometimes machines aren't perfect. Sometimes they're messy. Like people? Lysra frowned, confused. Messy is inefficient, not always, he grinned. Sometimes messy means flexible. Look, if we stagger the pulses slightly instead of forcing exact alignment, the system might stabilize on its own. Like two people walking slightly out of step but still moving forward together. She watched as he made the adjustments. Her eyes widened when the diagnostic pad lit up green. Stable. It worked, she whispered. Marcus winked. Told you. Sometimes messy is good. Lysra stared at him for a long moment. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Like her thoughts were worth building upon, like her mistakes were just steps toward progress. For the first time in her life at the academy, she felt the strange warmth of belonging. By the end of the cycle, their prototype pulsed with steady light, the energy core humming in harmony. It was far from complete, but it was alive. Marcus leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. Not bad for a first day, huh? Lysra nodded, her glowing skin faintly brighter. It is promising, he laughed. Promising. That's the best compliment I've gotten all week. She tilted her head slightly, confused. It is not common for you to receive compliments? Not the kind that matter, he admitted with a shrug. Back home, people said I was wasting my time tinkering with old machines. Said I should aim for something bigger. Something that made money. But I like this. Building things. Fixing things. Lysra studied him quietly. He spoke so openly, so honestly. Her people rarely shared personal truths with outsiders, but Marcus offered his like it was nothing. Your machines, they are part of you, she said softly. He blinked, then smiled. Yeah, guess they are. As they packed up, Marcus slung his bag over his shoulder and looked at her. You're good at this, Lysra. Really good. Anyone who says otherwise is blind. Her chest tightened, though not with pain this time. With something else. Something she didn't have a word for. She lowered her gaze quickly. Thank you. He nodded as though it were the most natural exchange in the world. Same time tomorrow? Lysra hesitated, then nodded. Yes? Good. He gave a short wave, casual and friendly. before heading out of the workshop. Lysera remained behind for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the humming core. She stared at the door he had left through, her patterns glowing softly. No one had ever spoken to her that way. No one had ever trusted her, worked beside her, listened to her ideas without suspicion. The whispers of the other students still echoed in the room, but they seemed distant now. For the first time, Lysera felt that the seat beside her was not just filled, it was shared. And in that quiet, flickering workshop, the first spark of something new had been lit, something that neither prejudice nor fear could easily extinguish. The orbital academy ran on the steady heartbeat of reactors. Deep inside the station's core, great chambers of humming energy provided light, warmth, and air for thousands of students. The academy often used smaller versions of these reactors in their training halls, allowing students to practice with live systems under controlled supervision. It was during one of these practical sessions that everything began to change. Lysera arrived early, as always. She moved quietly among the rows of reactor consoles, her glowing skin dimmed in caution. Around her, students gathered in groups, excitement buzzing through the air. Today was important. They were not only studying theory, but testing stabilization procedures on a small training reactor. Marcus came in moments later, hair a little messy as if he had run straight from the dorms. He dropped his toolkit on the bench beside her, giving her a quick grin. Ready to save the galaxy again? Lysera tilted her head, confused. The galaxy is not in danger today, Marcus chuckled. Maybe not. But these reactors have a way of making things exciting. Before she could respond, the professor, an elder Serath with slow, deliberate speech, called the class to attention. Today you will learn to balance live reactor coils. Precision is required. Mistakes will not be tolerated. Work with your assigned partners. Lysera felt every eye flicker toward her, as though the words "mistakes will not be tolerated" were aimed directly at her. She lowered her gaze, but Marcus simply leaned back in his chair, unconcerned. Don't worry, he whispered. We got this. The students spread across the chamber. Each pair was assigned to a console linked to the training reactor at the center of the room. The reactor glowed a soft blue, its energy pulsing in steady rhythm. Lysera's hands moved quickly across her panel, her calculations precise. She monitored the core temperature, adjusted the field strength, and recorded each number with care. Marcus worked beside her, his hands moving more loosely, adjusting clamps and dials with practiced ease. Steady, Lysera said softly. Steady as she goes, Marcus replied, turning a dial. Almost there. For a while everything went smoothly. Other students whispered, some sneered, but Lysera focused only on the reactor's rhythm. She could almost forget the eyes on her. Almost. Then, without warning, alarms blared. The reactor's glow shifted from calm blue to a dangerous, pulsing red. Numbers on the screen spiked wildly. The stabilizing coils trembled on the edge of collapse. Panic spread instantly. Shut it down, one student shouted. It's going critical. Another cried. Many dropped their tools and backed away from the consoles. The professor shouted commands, but his voice was drowned in the chaos. Lysera's breath caught. She saw at once what had gone wrong. The coils were out of alignment by a fraction, enough to trigger a chain reaction. If they failed completely, the explosion would tear through the chamber. Everyone was running. Everyone except Marcus and her, Lysera. Marcus shouted over the alarms. Talk to me, what do we do? Her fingers flew across the console. The compression field must be realigned. The timing is wrong. If we stabilize within 30 seconds, we can prevent detonation. 30 seconds? That's all? Yes, Marcus nodded without hesitation. Then let's do it. Lysera blinked at him. No doubt, no fear. Just certainty. Together they moved. Lysera recalculated the synchronization pattern, her glowing fingers darting across the screen. Marcus leapt to the secondary panel, rerouting power lines manually. Sparks burst from the console, but he didn't flinch. Pressure's building, he shouted. Divert to the auxiliary line. Lysera answered, her voice sharp and sure. On it. The room seemed to shrink around them, the roar of the reactor filling their ears. Students crowded at the far wall, some yelling, others frozen in terror. The professor tried to approach, but the heat forced him back. Only Lysera and Marcus remained at the front, standing against the storm. 10 seconds, Lysera said, her voice trembling but steady. Marcus, the coil now. Marcus slammed the lever down. The reactor screamed, light flooding the chamber. For an instant, everything seemed to freeze. Then slowly, the pulsing red glow dimmed. The alarms quieted. The numbers on the screens dropped back into safe ranges. The reactor stabilized. Silence fell. Lysra staggered back, her chest heaving. Marcus leaned against the console, sweat dripping down his face, but a grin spreading wide. Well, that was fun. No one laughed. Instead, whispers began. Harsh, accusing whispers. She touched the console. She caused it. It was her kind. Of course it was her kind. She almost killed us all. Lysra froze. The words struck like blades. She wanted to speak, to explain, but her throat closed. Then Marcus's voice cut through the noise, firm and sharp. Enough! Everyone turned. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes blazing. You saw what happened. The reactor was failing before we touched it. And when it did, she's the one who fixed it. She saved all of you. The room fell quiet, but the glares didn't vanish. Some muttered, unwilling to admit what they had seen. Marcus didn't back down. He pointed toward Lysra. Without her calculations, without her precision, this whole chamber would be dust. You'd be dust. So if anyone has a problem, you say it to me. Lysra stared at him in shock. No one had ever defended her like that. Not once. The professor finally stepped forward, his 4 eyes narrowing. Enough. We will investigate the cause of the failure. Until then, no more accusations. He paused, glancing at Lysra, his tone cautious. But the truth will come out. Lysra lowered her gaze, the weight of suspicion heavy on her shoulders. But beside her, Marcus remained firm, standing tall against the silent storm of prejudice. Later, after the chamber was cleared and the reactor powered down, Lysra sat alone in the corner of the workshop. Her hands trembled as she stared at the floor. The whispers still echoed in her ears. She caused it. She almost killed us. She wanted to disappear, to fade into the shadows of the station and never be seen again. Then Marcus dropped down on the bench beside her, as casually as if they were still in lecture hall. He nudged her shoulder lightly. You okay? Lysra shook her head slowly. They believe I did this. They're wrong. They always believe I am wrong, she whispered. No matter what I do, it is never enough. My people's shadow is too heavy. I cannot escape it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching her. Then he said, You don't have to escape it. You just have to outshine it. She looked at him, confused. Outshine? Yeah, he smiled faintly. You don't erase shadows. You shine brighter until people can't see them anymore. Today you did that. You saved them, even though they'll never admit it. That takes more strength than any reactor coil. Lysra's patterns flickered softly, betraying the emotion rising in her chest. She turned away quickly, hiding the glow. Why do you speak this way to me? Because it's true, Marcus said simply. And because someone has to. She stared at him in silence, the weight of his words pressing deeper than any accusation ever had. That night, as she lay in her narrow dorm bed, Lysra replayed the day in her mind. The alarms, the heat, the terror, and the human who never left her side. No one had ever stood with her before. No one had ever spoken for her, defended her when the world turned away. For the first time in her life, she realized she was not completely alone. And that realization, fragile but powerful, was more stabilizing than any reactor coil. The academy's corridors buzzed with unease. After the reactor incident, whispers traveled faster than light. Everywhere Lysra walked, she felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. Some stared openly with distrust, others whispered behind her back. She was near the console when it happened. Her kind always breaks things. It is dangerous to keep her here. Lysra kept her head down. Her glowing patterns dimmed to the faintest flicker, each word pressed against her like a chain. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had grown used to this long ago. Yet somehow, after Marcus had stood beside her, the whispers hurt more than before. Because now she knew what it felt like to not be alone. An official investigation was launched. The Academy Council, a mix of species with long robes and sharper eyes, declared that the reactor logs would be examined. Until the results came, students were warned not to spread rumors. But rumors didn't need permission. They spread anyway. Marcus saw it happening. He heard the mutters in the lecture halls, the mocking laughs in the cafeteria. He saw how Lysra sat even smaller than before, shrinking into herself. And he hated it. One evening he found her in the workshop alone at their station. She was staring at the half-built prototype of their hybrid engine, but her hands weren't moving. The glow of her patterns was faint, almost dull. You're not working, Marcus said gently as he set his toolkit down. Lysra didn't look up. It no longer matters. The council will decide against me. They always do, Marcus frowned. You don't know that. I do, she whispered. The galaxy does not forget. My people's name is written in war and fire. No matter what I do, they see only that. Marcus leaned on the bench, studying her. Then why are you still here? Her eyes flickered toward him, confused. Because I wanted to prove them wrong. And you still can. She shook her head. Not anymore. The shadow is too heavy. I should leave before more harm comes. Marcus's jaw tightened. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the resignation. She had lived with this burden so long that giving up seemed easier than fighting, but he wasn't about to let her walk away. No, he said firmly. You're not leaving. Lysera blinked at him. It is not your choice. You're right, Marcus admitted. It's not. But if you leave now, they win. The ones whispering, the ones accusing, they'll tell themselves they were right all along. They'll say, see, she couldn't handle it. And the next Kalorian who tries will suffer the same. Lysera lowered her gaze. Perhaps it is easier if no Kalorian tries. Marcus slammed his hand lightly on the bench, not in anger, but in passion. And what about you? What about the one who actually stayed, who worked harder than all of them, who saved their lives in that reactor chamber? Doesn't that mean anything? She was silent. Marcus softened his voice. Lysera, you shine brighter than all of them, and they're scared of it. That's the truth. And I'm not going to let you hide just because they're too blind to see it. For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly her patterns brightened just a little. Not much, but enough to show she was listening. Days passed. The investigation dragged on. Then one morning a message arrived for Marcus and Lysera. Report to the council chamber. The chamber was vast, circular, with a glowing floor and high seats where the council members sat. Students crowded the gallery, eager to watch. Lysera walked in with her head bowed, her shoulders tense. Marcus walked beside her, steady and unshaken. The Sarath counselor spoke first, his 4 eyes heavy with authority. The investigation into the reactor incident is complete. The data shows irregular interference with the stabilization coils. At first glance, it appeared to be operator error. Whispers rose in the gallery. Lysera's hands clenched. But, the counselor continued, his voice echoing, further analysis revealed traces of deliberate tampering. The room erupted in gasps. Tampering? Sabotage? Yes, the counselor said. A coded signal was sent to the reactor, altering its calibration. This was not an accident. Someone wanted it to fail. Lysera's eyes widened. For the first time in cycles, she felt a small piece of the weight lift. It hadn't been her mistake, but relief was short-lived. The Vorthin counselor leaned forward, his scaled brow furrowing. And yet suspicion remains. Who would have reason to sabotage the test? Who would benefit? His eyes swept the chamber, pausing on Lysera. The whispers began again. Marcus stepped forward before Lysera could shrink further. You think she did it? That's insane. She's the one who stopped it from blowing us all to pieces. The Vorthin counselor hissed. Silence, human. No, Marcus snapped, his voice cutting through the room. You can't keep using her people's past as an excuse to blame her for everything. Someone tried to frame her. You all know it. The Sarath counselor raised a hand, calming the chamber. The data is clear. The signal originated not from Lysera's console, but from a remote terminal. We are still investigating who is responsible. The room buzzed with confusion. Some students looked shocked, others suspicious. But the undeniable fact had been spoken. It wasn't Lysera. Marcus glanced at her. She was trembling, her glowing patterns flickering with relief and fear. He gave her a small nod, steady as stone. The council dismissed them, promising further inquiry, but the truth had already spread through the gallery. The story was no longer about the Kalorian who broke the reactor. It was about the sabotage no one had expected. Later, in the quiet of the workshop, Lysera sat across from Marcus, her hands still trembling. It was not me, she whispered. The words felt strange on her tongue, like a freedom she had almost forgotten. Of course it wasn't, Marcus said simply. But they still looked at me, she murmured. Even when the truth was clear, they still looked at me as if it was possible. Marcus leaned forward. That's because prejudice doesn't vanish with one fact.
It takes time.
But every time you stand your ground, every time you prove them wrong, you make it harder for them to cling to their lies. Lysera stared at him, her chest tight. You believe I should stay. I believe you have to stay, Marcus corrected. Not just for you. For every Kalorian who comes after you. You staying here is proof that shadows can't win forever. Her glowing patterns flickered brighter, slowly like the first stars appearing in night sky. She wanted to believe him. For the first time, she almost did. The days that followed were tense. Whispers still lingered, but they had changed. Now the students spoke not only of Lysera, but of hidden enemies, of plots inside the academy. Lysera and Marcus kept working on their hybrid engine side by side. Each hour they spent together, the silence around them grew less heavy. Each time Marcus cracked a joke or tossed her a tool with casual trust, the shadows on her shoulders lifted just a little more. And though fear still lingered, Lysera found herself thinking the same thought again and again. Maybe I do not have to sit alone anymore. The academy never truly grew quiet after the sabotage was revealed. Every corridor hummed with suspicion, and every lecture was interrupted by whispers of hidden enemies. Still, Lysera felt lighter than before. For the first time, her name was not tied to failure. Yet the stares did not vanish. Even when she walked through the halls, even when she proved her skill in the workshop, she could feel it. Eyes that still judged, voices that still doubted. But now, there was always Marcus beside her. And that made all the difference. The investigation continued for several weeks. Eventually, the council identified the culprit, a rival student from one of the wealthier colonies who feared that Lysera and Marcus's project would outshine his own. The revelation spread quickly, shaking the academy. For many, it was shocking. Sabotage was rare among students, rarer still during critical experiments. But for Lysera, the knowledge carried something deeper: vindication. It had not been her fault. When the announcement was made in the assembly hall, Marcus glanced at her. He expected her to smile, to glow brighter, to stand taller. Instead, she sat quietly, her patterns flickering softly. "You don't look happy," Marcus whispered. "I am," she said slowly, and it should not have taken so long. "They doubted me until the last moment." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Yeah, but they know the truth now. That matters." Lysera didn't answer right away, but when she finally lifted her gaze, she whispered, "Perhaps it does." As the end of the cycle approached, the academy prepared for the graduation trials. These were the final tests for advanced students. A chance to prove not only technical skill but also resilience, teamwork, and leadership. The trial would decide their futures. Lysera and Marcus entered as partners. Their project, the hybrid engine, chosen as the foundation of their test. They were to present it before the council, demonstrate its functionality, and defend their design against challenges. It was the moment both had worked toward for months. But for Lysera, it carried something more. It was not just an exam. It was her chance to prove once and for all that she belonged here. The day of the trial arrived. The great hall was filled with students, council members, and invited guests from across the galaxy. Holographic banners floated above, shimmering with the academy's crest. Lysera stood at the edge of the stage, her hands trembling slightly. Her glowing patterns shifted nervously, Marcus noticed. "Hey," he said softly. "Breathe. You've got this." She looked at him, her throat tight. "What if I fail?" "Then we fail together," he said without hesitation. "But we won't, because we built this with our own hands, and it works. Trust it, trust yourself." Lysera drew in a slow breath. For a moment she studied his face. Calm, steady, certain. His belief in her was like a shield she had never known she could carry. Finally she nodded. "Together then," Marcus smiled. "Always." Their presentation began. Lysera and Marcus spoke in turns, explaining how their hybrid engine combined human efficiency with Calorian resonance technology. They showed how it could generate more power with less fuel, how it adapted to fluctuating environments, how it could stabilize even under extreme stress. Then came the demonstration. The prototype hummed to life, its coils glowing with Calorian light while human circuits pulsed with steady power. The hall was bathed in a soft golden blue glow as the engine roared, smooth and stable. Gasps filled the chamber. Even the council members leaned forward, their expressions sharp with interest. Lysera felt her chest tighten. Not with fear this time, but with something new, pride. For once, the whispers around her were not suspicion. They were awe. When the test concluded, the engine powered down gracefully without a flicker of instability. The silence that followed was heavy, waiting. Then the hall erupted into applause. Lysera froze. She had never heard such a sound directed at her before. For so long she had been the one students avoided, the one no one wanted to sit beside. Now the sound of clapping hands surrounded her, echoing like thunder. Her glowing patterns flared bright, filling the stage with light she couldn't hold back. Marcus leaned toward her, grinning. "Told you." But the trial wasn't finished. After the applause, the council began their questioning. Their voices were sharp, their words heavy, testing every detail of the design. Why had they chosen this circuit alignment? How would the engine hold up under radiation storms? What if the resonance field destabilized? Lysera and Marcus answered together, their words weaving smoothly. Marcus handled the human engineering principles. Lysera explained the resonance harmonics with precision. When Lysera spoke, the room grew still. For the first time, people were not staring at her as a Kalorian, but as a scientist, a thinker, an equal. By the time the questioning ended, even the harshest counselor had little left to challenge. The results were announced the following day. Lysera and Marcus had not only passed the graduation trials, they had earned the highest honors of their class. Their hybrid engine would be forwarded to research fleets for further development. The academy hall filled with cheers once more. Students who had once whispered against Lysera now applauded her openly. Some even approached after the ceremony, offering words of respect. It felt strange, unfamiliar, yet warm. Lysera accepted their words quietly, but in her heart she knew the truth. She would never have reached this moment alone. That evening, after the celebrations, Lysera sat in her usual quiet corner of the academy gardens. The stars shone above, bright and endless. For years she had sat in places like this alone, her silence heavy. But tonight the bench beside her was not empty. Marcus dropped down onto it without a word, just as he had the first time. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the academy's towers and the distant laughter of celebrating students. Finally, Lysera spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "Do you know what it means that you sat beside me that day?" Marcus tilted his head. "Enlighten me." "It meant," she said slowly, "that I was not invisible. That even if the galaxy hated my shadow, someone still saw me." Marcus smiled faintly. "You were never invisible. They just didn't know where to look." Her glowing patterns brightened, spreading across her skin like starlight. She turned her gaze to him, her voice low but clear. "Thank you, Marcus, for staying." He shrugged lightly. "Didn't seem right to leave you sitting there." Lysera studied him for a long moment, then looked back at the stars. For the first time, the silence around her did not feel heavy. It felt safe. As the night deepened, Marcus leaned back, arms folded behind his head. "So what now? You've got the whole galaxy watching. You could join any research fleet you want." Lysera's glow dimmed thoughtfully. "I do not know yet, but wherever I go..." She paused, then added quietly, "I would not mind if you sat beside me again." Marcus chuckled. "Deal, just don't start without me." She smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. The stars above glittered, endless and bright. And though the galaxy still carried shadows, Lysera knew she was no longer walking through them alone. For once she had a place. For once the seat beside her would never again be empty.